In October 2024, a panel of Cruising Club of America members, all veterans of completing transatlantic crossings, discussed their experiences and ideas about how to cross the ocean safely and efficiently. So our panel here, Andy Burton, veteran of 9 transatlantic races and a lot of cruising, coming up on 500,000 miles of cruising. That's a lot. I mean, it's a comment that I think, Andy, we just stunned everybody. You know, I tried to add up how many miles I've done in ocean racing, and I came up to about 50,000. So you're only done 10 times more of all the ocean races I've done together. Pretty cool. But I have done, I did try and count up with all my records how many sailboat races I've done, and I'm at 5,900. How's your record there?
Not quite there.
Bill Strasberg has completed 9 transatlantics, and most importantly, he was in Ireland at the where the cruise is going next summer, and has put together a presentation. So we look forward to that. Ernie Gottschalk has done exactly 1 transatlantic, although he spent a lot of time with his boat in Europe and done long passages. And Sheila McCurdy tops the record here. She's done, drum roll, 10 transatlantic crossings, all of them on sailboats. That's quite an achievement. And you know, I said, Bill, how many have you done? He said 3 so far. Yeah. Good answer. So Sheila, can you add a so far onto your list of transatlantics? Would you do it again?
In the middle of every transatlantic, I have always said, never again. So there's always another possibility.
Well, the way I look at it is the one common denominator about these long passages is short memories.
You know, somebody asked me, what is it like to sail across the transatlantic? And I read in a book someplace that somebody described it as fill up a railroad car with Cheerios and start eating. And that's what it's like to cross the. Ernie, do you have any more transatlantics in your future?
Not sure yet.
You're considering it?
Probably not.
How about you, Andy?
Yeah, I'm going to take my boat over next year to Scotland.
And when are you going to go? What time of year are you going to leave?
I'm going to leave June 5th and go to the Azores first, because I've never explored the Azores.
Oh, I've been there. It's an interesting place for sure.
It's beautiful. I've only been to Horta.
Okay, very good. All right, so we have 4 topics to talk about today. We're going to talk about navigation and weather routing. We're going to talk about vessel preparation and inspection. Don't you love inspections? Crew makeup and selection, and communications. And all 4 of these are very important, and none of them are a priority. All of them are important. And I'm going to ask Bill to kick off. He's done a presentation on navigation and weather routing. He told me his presentation is 18 minutes, and being the dutiful editor that I try to be sometimes, I asked Bill to cut it in half so we have plenty of time. So Bill, if you could walk us through your 9-minute presentation.
Great. Well, we'll skip that slide.
Use the microphone.
We'll discuss routing and distance sailed and weather considerations and how they affect your choice of route. The panel discussion is, of course, in preparation for the feeder cruise to the 2025 Western Isles Rally. So we're going to focus on boats that are leaving from New England. There are other typical routes. But for this discussion, we're going to think about a boat leaving from the Newport, Rhode Island area. And the predominant weather considerations are the lows that come off the east to the east coast to the north of the route, and the Azores high to the south. The boundaries would be Newport to the west, Newfoundland and Fastnet Rock will be north and east, and the Azores and Bermuda to the south. So when you think about the navigation, we can discuss first the southernmost and then the northernmost routes. This is the southern route through Bermuda and Azores. It is about 3,460 miles, 3,500 nautical miles. While many boats coming from the Caribbean or those headed to Spain or the Med would go through the Azores, you have to decide whether it's the route of choice for a boat leaving from Newport in early June. The northernmost route approximates the Great Circle route. It actually goes over the land masses of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. But it is around 2,600 nautical miles. This leaves what I call the middle ground, staying south of Newfoundland and north of the Azores. A direct route in red is about 2,770 nautical miles, using a waypoint of about 40 north, 50 west, for all intents and purposes. Another route could be going down through Bermuda, and that route would be almost 3,300 nautical miles. And the interesting thing, just to wrap your brains around all this, is that the leg from Bermuda to Fastnet Rock is about 2,660 nautical miles. It's about the same as the entire direct route. So we'll discuss how weather considerations affects the routing choice. But first, I just wanted to give a quick hello to Kinsale. I was there in July of this year, having delivered Visions of Johanna from Newfoundland. It's a great town, historic port. This is a 17th century fort, the Charles Fort. It's just great. This is the yacht club, Kinsale Yacht Club, which is where you will stay if you go on that feeder cruise. And it's really quite a marvelous little town. Oh, back to the routing. The middle routes come together around that 40 north, 50 west waypoint. And 40 north is a safe waypoint when you're considering ice. It's about the southernmost limit of any known ice limits. Just above, you see a little boat icon. That's where the Titanic sank back in 1912. And the map on the right is the June 10th, 2023 North American Ice Service map for ice in the North Atlantic. And the ice limit was about 45 north in 2023. So you can fudge that. You can fudge your northern waypoint depending on the ice year, but it's something you want to keep in mind. You'll eventually get overtaken by successive fronts due to the low pressure systems coming off North America. On average, maybe one every 5 days. So, you know, on a typical 15 to 20 day passing, you're going to be crossed by 3 or 4 fronts. Most will be moderate, but a few will have a punch. And the trick is to anticipate them. Building southwesterlies, frontal pass, and then a shift to the west and northwest. So you set yourself up when you know something is coming that has a punch. You set yourself up so that your sail configuration will handle it. So how do we get that weather? There are many ways to access weather data. These slides will display what I tend to do. They don't mean they're the right thing to do or what you should do. I break it down into professional weather routers, into downloading the grid files and viewing them on different routing type software. Professional weather routing services, I use one for my ocean crossings. I just consider it cheap insurance. There are many, Commander's Weather, WRI. I happen to use Locust Weather, and Ken McKinley. He's good, he gives personal service, and he's from Maine, so what could be bad? In terms of viewing them, Expedition, Predict Wind, Time Zero, Oceans WeatherNet, all are options. This is my program. I use Expedition software for my weather planning, routing, and passage making. Couple tools. I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of my favorites, SailDocs, developed by CCA member Jim Carman. It gives great access and quick access to different weather models, GFS, Euro model, and allows you to subscribe. It's free, and There is on the marine electronic site PANBO, P-A-N-B-O. There's a good tutorial on it to learn to be more familiar with it. Just a very quick second, the sail dock story from Jim, just in a nutshell. He said it's simple. We needed weather. I couldn't find what we needed, so I built it. And it was pretty cool, so we shared it. Thank you, Jim. So many ways to download GRIB files from single sideband Pactor modems to SATCOMs. It's really the skipper's choice. Choice depends on size of budget, size of boat, frequency of use, and the needs. The common denominator is just be good at whatever your chosen system is. Be good so you can do it when the swells are 12 to 16 feet and it's pretty gnarly outside. Muscle memory, downloading the weather. Another little tool I use is for backup is a Garmin InReach, and there are many good text messaging satellite services. I use the InReach. I like it because it is totally independent of any other vessel communication system. It has text messaging, which I have used across, say, the Tasman Sea with Locust Weather and Ken McKinley as my weather router. And it gives 24-hour tracking, so your loved ones and your crew's families and everybody can keep an eye on you. It really punches well above its weight for what it is and what it does. I'll skip through some of these. This is just a typical passage, a typical expedition slide from my passage. Up in the upper left is a low pressure front, a low pressure zone. Front coming off it. You can see the boat with the green arrow. I'm in the tail of the southwesterlies, which is what we want to do. There were lows coming, so I stayed south because you don't want to go too far north into the teeth of the low, and then I get into a wind desert. So you pays your money and you takes your chances, but you decide whether that was a good decision or not. You're going to be hit with a squall at some point. This is expedition with the overlying radar display. And we had about 15-20 minutes of interesting times going through this. This brings me back to what this discussion is all about. In the essence, it's good vessel preparation, your infrastructure, your systems. You build a good crew on top of that, and we'll all be talking about this, a crew that is a team and works together. Then the skipper takes those components and the CCA culture of safety, and that all creates a safe passage. I call this the Zen of Venn diagrams for ocean passages. Finally, I will unabashedly plug a few of our CCA offerings as I close this down. Bringing the CCA life jacket and tether statement aboard will help you keep crew aboard. Our practice on your own boat program will help you and your crew feel more confident if that unmentionable happens. And finally, our CCA Essential Passage Guide to the Viking Route has many chapters on topics of safety, communications, cold weather sailing, cold water sailing, all germane to any North Atlantic passage. So we'll close. In the end, you'll find a million reasons not to go across. It's too complex. It seems like a big push. It's not perfect timing-wise. What am I going to do with the boat in the winter? And there's one reason to go. It's because you've made your mind to do it, and it's a great trip, and you'll make it happen. And when you get to Kinsale, you'll be standing in front of the Bullman pub, toasting your crew with a good cold Guinness.
Well done. Thank you very much, Bill. 6 minutes. Well done. Andy, let me ask you, Bill alludes to it a little bit, but how do you put together a crew? What are the attributes you look in people? Is it different skill sets, kind of a matrix, or compatibility? What do you do to put together a crew for a long voyage like this?
Well, ideally, I'll have an EMT, a mechanic, an electrician, a gourmet cook, a rigger, and a sailmaker, all of whom have been helmsmen on a round-the-world race.
You have a masseuse?
Good point. Next trip. But I tend to treat my trips as if I'm single-handing, And fortunately, I've gained enough knowledge that I can do that. And I take crew who, well, the main thing is that they are able to steer a compass course in quartering seas. That's my main criteria. And then, of course, the next one is compatibility. Got to have a bunch of friends at the end of the trip.
How do you do that? I mean, I've been on a pile of ocean races for many years, and you never really know until you're out there and it's 4 in the morning and you're doing the jib change, and then you start to make friends and you find out who's who.
Yeah, as,
can you figure that out in advance? Try and do some sailing early? How do you do that?
You can tell a lot from just yakking with the people. I've used Facebook on to get some crew, and I did a winter transatlantic, leaving in the ice, actually having to break ice to head over to France on a boat, and my crew was entirely from Facebook because none of my regulars were available. And I had a lot of people who wanted to come. We winnowed it down to 5 and checked references, talked to other people I'd sailed with, and talked to them a lot. And it's, you know, you can pick up on cues whether someone knows what they're talking about if you spend a little time talking to them. And that was a very successful crew. At the end of the cruise, 6 weeks later, we're still drinking together.
I did a lecture one time at Mystic Seaport. I was 29 years old at the time, and I was with 2 old guys. They were both 70, which doesn't seem so old to me any longer, since I've well past that. However, one of the 2 was Rod Stevens, and the other was Captain Irving Johnson. And Irving Johnson said something that's always resonated with me during his nifty lecture about going around Cape Horn. He said, as long as you have a crew that everybody has the attitude to do just a little bit more than they're expected to do, everything will work out well. And that has stuck with me over a lot of years. Just do a little bit more than you're expected.
That makes a lot of sense, and I've been lucky that most of my crews have been like that. And I just like to say, you gotta. It's hard to attract good crew who want to take 2 or 4 weeks off, and that comes. Food is a big motivator. So we're yachtsmen. A boater is a hat. So we never camp on board, and that's reflected on how we eat. Do self-serve breakfast usually, cold cereal or hot cereal if you want, sandwiches for lunch, and then good dinner, a hot meal. Dinners are from scratch, from Julia Child's recipes or whatever, and we put together a good meal. And that goes a long way to keeping a happy crew.
Are you an advocate of freeze-dried food on long passages?
I think you know the answer to that.
There's a 79 Fastnet. We were coming down the Fastnet Rock, and the weather forecast was pretty rough. And our cook, Jane Potts, Reeves Potts' sister, had done a roast in the oven. And we had string beans and mashed potatoes and a whole roast. And I credit that really good meal we had going into Fastnet Rock for able to survive that really tart night. So I'm not a fan of freeze-dried food either. Yeah. So even though you want to go. Well, Sheila, you with 10 transatlantics and a pile of Bermuda races, and you know the value of preparation, and of course with the CCA, making sure everybody's adhering to our regulations before an ocean race like the Bermuda race. What should we be thinking about? I think you've got a few slides you'd like to show here.
I think the most important thing to realize when the 3 weeks for getting across the ocean, 2 to 3 weeks, is going to put a year of wear and tear on your boat. You're going 24 hours a day. The seas are taking a toll. Your sails are taking a toll from all those weather systems that Bill showed you. And the other thing is you don't have any backup. Your backup is with you, and this is where Murphy's Law comes in. Anything that can go wrong will. usually at the worst possible time. And there's a really sinister corollary to that. Nature always sides with the hidden flaw. And the ocean is nature manifest. You are out of our element and into another element. And so that's what you're preparing your boat for, as well as your crew. So a few essentials. As long as you've got everything that you have on board to deal with keeping the water out of the boat, hull, hatches, bilge, seacocks, you know those are inspected. John bonds. How many people here knew John bonds? Good Navy expression. It's not what you expect, it's what you inspect. Then you're dealing with the rig, the deck, the sails, the rigging, the steering. Steering takes a real beating. And then, of course, all your safety and emergency equipment. A good source for figuring out that is the special equipment requirements that Chuck Hawley and others in this room put together for U.S. sailing initially, and then also the Newport Bermuda race. Really good checklists to go through on for the equipment to have on board. But remember, there are some things that those special equipment requirements don't put in because they're for racing. Curiously, they don't mention a bosun's chair. So don't forget the bosun's chair just because it's not in the special regs. And another thing it doesn't mention, because it's for racing, is good dock lines and fenders, which you will need at the other end. We can last for a long time without food, but fresh water can be a make or break. And of course, the WCs, the head systems. How many people here have had a head problem? Right. So you know that's a weak point on boats. The engine, fuel, propulsion system should be completely checked over. If you're an expert at it, fine. Other people. But on the other hand, out of my 10 transatlantics, twice I've arrived on the other side without a functioning engine. So I now consider engines a luxury, not an essential. And then the electrical and the electronics, of course, all very susceptible to salt water and an ocean environment to stop working. So that leads us to navigation backups. Don't forget the paper charts. Maybe even bring a sextant. And then with the cooking fuel, make your plan for Europe, for however you're going to deal with European options. So that's the rig you're going to have to be inspecting. This one I took before the Bermuda race, so I knew the number of the belt on the Yanmar. And this is what you want to be prepared for. This is the wear and tear that on the steering I was telling you about. Tools and spares. You can go plain or fancy on this. If David Tunick was here, I know he has roughly 14,000 pounds of spares and equipment on his boat. But don't forget the manuals, and if you have drawings for your boat, those can be really essential too when you're trying to troubleshoot something. Nick Brown had me trying to figure out why his radar didn't work. I was able to look at the drawings and figure out what was wrong. Not that we could fix it, but I could give him an answer. And then the parts you need for all your equipment and gear on board. The jury rig, boy, anything that can go wrong will. So the more inventive and thoughtful you are on that, the better. And think about this. This was an Italian who was sailing single-handed around the world on a 21-footer. He lost the top of his rig somewhere in the Southern Ocean. and sailed from Cape Horn to France with this rig. So you see the top of his mast is missing. He's made something of a bowsprit. He's put himself... Anyway, mother of invention, and amazing things are possible if you think it through. This was Jim and Jean Foley, who were sailing their boat across the Indian Ocean. They were 1,400 miles, I think, south-southeast of Mauritius, i.e. the middle of nowhere. And the bolts sheared on their steering, the bearing on their rudder. What's written at the bottom is advice they got from a boat builder: every boat should carry wood scraps. So they were able to shore the bearing into place. It's an aluminum boat, so they were better off not, I mean, it wasn't going to tear the boat apart quite so fast, but it was going to create a big hole in the boat if they lost their rudder. And they sailed 500 miles to an uninhabited island that had a little harbor made out of a crater that had been broken out to the sea. And they rebuilt their steering system and were able to rebolt the bearing in place there, the two of them, and then sailed 1,500 miles on to Australia. So you can be smart and you can be lucky. Many of you have heard about the boats that were abandoned on the Bermuda race this year. We did not have to abandon our boat, but we had new speedos that were put in, and the installer had neglected to put in a critical nut, which held the inner sleeve of the speedo to the outer sleeve of the through-hull fitting, and so the speedo backed out and blew the floorboard up out of its position in the head, where one of our crew was at the moment, probably fortunately. And she opened the door of the head and said, "These are two lines you don't want to hear in quick succession. Start the pumps." And Sheila, you got to see this. So by the time I got up to the head, I found Karen Prelo, also a cruising club member, standing there with her heel over the through-hull fitting. We were no longer flooding. Her heel was in place.
Just stay there.
Yeah, just stay there. And over the course of the next 15 minutes, we worked out a rather elegant jury rig, if I do say so myself. But I had to ask the navigator if she had a stubby pencil. So that's what you can do if you think it through. But the most important thing about damage control is to slow the problem down so you can think it through. So here we are. If you are thinking of doing a long passage, prioritize the essentials. 1, keep the water out of the boat. 2, keep the people in the boat. Speaking to, the life, the harness and clip-on rules. Have plenty of ways of getting where you want to go, because the alternatives aren't so great. And then remember that everything else is a luxury. There are a lot of things we have on our fancy boats that we don't really need to use to get from here to there. I involve the crew early. The more the whole crew knows what's going on in the boat, the better. And then ultimately, everybody will have a good time if you keep it fun.
Very good. Thank you very much. So let me just follow up here, Sheila. Are there some things that sailors, boat owners forget or overlook when they're preparing the boat that come to mind? Any?
A few things.
Okay.
Sails. A lot of people decide they can use that old sail to get across the ocean, and and then that'll be the last hurrah. But when that old sail blows up mid-ocean, you have now just, let me put it out, taken the fun out of your trip. So it's much better to have a newer sail than an older sail. A really common one is people who have had their boats around coasts forever don't realize how much gunk is in their fuel tanks and what the sea does in stirring that all up and how quickly you can clog every fuel filter on the boat over and over and over again. So clean out your tanks before you go. Those are two of the essential ones. Other ones you would mention?
I can put you in the spot. Did you ever forget anything essential?
Yes. Yes, Gary, I did. On my first transatlantic with Ed Greff, and he had taken me on it as a 21-year-old to cook on a transatlantic, I forgot a toothbrush. This is a really bad thing to forget on a transatlantic. So I had to, well, after a few days, I had inspected every locker on the boat and found a brush, which I boiled.
So the message is you were resourceful in a time of need.
There we go.
All righty. Well, Ernie, you've spent a lot of time in Europe with your boat over there after getting it across. And what are some of your favorite places that you visited while you were in Europe?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. So let me address, if you do the transatlantic, you're going to end up in Europe. That was kind of a surprise to me.
Yeah, that's a good place to go.
I had no plan whatsoever, and ended up staying there for 10 years. And it was fabulous. We stayed in Northern Europe. We went to the west coast of Norway above the Arctic Circle. We went into the Baltic and into St. Petersburg, Russia. We went up the canal into the lakes of Finland, all along both coasts of the Baltic pretty much, and then down into the English Channel, and spent a summer in Brittany. So we put quite a few miles on the boat and went to quite a few places.
You know, boats, in my experience, have limited storage for things. How do you fit everything on the boat that you need? You've got to have a lot of food, you got the right clothing, backup sail. How do you worry about provisions? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Another sort of surprise, because I anticipated this problem, and I went through the boat and I found 70 different places on the boat, from the chain locker at the bow, which became number 1, to the lazarette, which became number 70. And I had this magnificent plan that we were going to catalog where everything went. Well, that was, you know, everybody learns the first time they do something. And of course, what happened was we did the provisioning and brought all the stuff on board and put it in the saloon, and we were piles of stuff everywhere. We actually delayed our departure by a day because it took so long to put stuff away. And of course, by about 10 minutes into the process, the whole idea of cataloging where everything went just totally went out the window, and it got stored wherever it had to get stored. One thing that did work very well in this regard is that my brother was part of the crew, and while he's not a particularly experienced, particularly offshore sailor, he is a very organized camper. He's a licensed guide both in the Galapagos and in the Grand Canyon. And he came out a week early, and he brought along a vacuum pack thing and packaged all of our food and labeled it. So we were extremely organized in that respect. And the other thing that he did too was he was very good at trash maintenance. So anything that would be recyclable, he cut into small pieces that would store very easily. And so that worked out very well too.
That's pretty clever. Do you have some kind of compactor, or you just cut up the plastic? How do you do that?
Yeah, I just basically took scissors, I think, and cut whatever needed to be cut so that it would lie flat in a small space.
I did an interview with a fellow member, Stan Honey, I think 2 years ago, and one of my questions is, you know, Stan, what do you do with navigation to win so many races? I think he's won 7 Transpac races. He's won the Bermuda race first to finish, first overall. 2 races ago, and and he's won the Volvo Ocean Race. And he says, well, I try to study more than anybody else. And I'll go back and look at this series of races and see what weather trends are. And then I'll overlay that with things that are going on to see if the trends. And so he really has made that work with this study. Bill, what kind of study do you do going in a transatlantic race when you prepare for weather and trying to figure out what's going to happen over the next, say, 14 to 21 days? How do you work with that?
Well, in the 14 to 21 day time frame, I usually flip a coin. I think what you have to do is get a sense of the weather before you leave. You start watching it 2 to 4 weeks, and minimum 2 weeks, 4 weeks ideal, before your estimated departure date, and get a sense of how the lows and the fronts are developing. The synoptic large picture weather patterns all have sort of a personality, and you want to figure out which is the weather person you're talking to this week. And as it gets close, you start downloading different weather models, and you see what weather model is tending to show what weather you're seeing. And then when you depart, I do the same thing. What's my weather been for the last 12 to 24 hours? What's the different models saying it was? That's the one I'm going to believe for the next 12 to 24 hours. So it's really a matter of sort of understanding the neighborhood that that you're in terms of what the weather is showing you, and then on the short-term basis, in the in the 2 to 3 day time frame, having a decent sense of what's ahead, and also knowing that even though your grid may go out 10 days, flip the coin.
All right, another flip the coin. Andy, with your 9 transatlantics and long passages, I'm still absorbing, my friend, 500,000 ocean miles. What do you do? How do you get to optimal weather routing when you do a passage?
As Bill said, I look at the trends for the weather beforehand, and I get a handle on where the lows are going across the Atlantic. So they'll follow a latitude. They're east-west once you get a little ways into the trip, and sometimes you can go across as far north as 42. Sometimes it'll be as far south as 38. And the idea being that you want to get the bottoms of the lows, because the lows spin this way. So you want to get the bottoms of the lows, and you might get 25 knots of breeze. You might get 40, but at least you're going downwind, and hopefully with the decks fairly dry. During COVID, I had a trip that was a beautiful boat, a Swan 53, brand new Swan 53, and all the way to the Azores, it was like sailing across Narragansett Bay on a calm day. When the wind was down, it was aft. When it was down, it was forward, and when it was up, it was aft. So the decks were dry all the way to the Azores, and that's one of my favorite things, is having dry decks.
But so, I don't think it's always like that, by the way. Tell me about your routine living on board the boat. How, everybody keeping clean, keeping things stowed away, getting things so they're not all over the map. How do you make it livable on board?
People have to keep their gear together. Just no matter how exhausted you are, put your stuff away. Hang your wet gear up. Don't leave stuff strewn all over the boat. It's years ago I used to sit at the nav table after dinner and work out my star sights, which the crew thought was magic. Then GPS came along, and everybody had their phone and they could tell where they were, turning on their phone. So I had to learn to cook. So I could get out of doing the dishes. So I take care of all the cooking, and that gives me a handle on the provisioning. I can keep the provisioning reasonable. I find people who haven't done long passages tend to buy 14 cans of tuna and 3 cases of cuppa soups. And they arrive with 14 cans of tuna and 3 cases of cuppa soups. My rule there is don't buy anything to eat on the boat that you wouldn't eat at home. No Dinty Moore. And one thing that's kind of serious is, as skipper, don't be afraid to give orders and make rules. I don't mean throw your weight around like Captain Bligh and all that, but when it comes to the safe operation of the boat, you've got to make it known that you're the go-to guy. You're the one in charge, and your style of operating a boat is what applies. And I have orders, standing orders. If this happens, call me. If that happens, call me. If you can't decide whether to call me, call me. And generally just try and keep things happy on the boat. A warm, dry crew. So try and if you have to do a headsail change, you're cruising. You're in the middle of the ocean. Just run off with it. You don't need to keep going to weather. Just keep your crew warm and dry. Dryness is huge, because once you get all salty and wet, it takes a long time for your gear to dry off.
I've been on boats where some people seem to yell more and more about less and less. And in the America's Cup just the other day, unfortunately, the British skipper, Ben Ainsley, had some salt and pepper language when was asked a question, and then the commentator answered it with some more expletive deleted. And then somebody, I don't know who, filed a Rule 69 for improper language, and then they found out the commentator got protested, and then they found the New Zealand skipper had said something he shouldn't have said, and I had dinner with the jury the night before the hearing, and my question was, well, how are you going to handle this? We're going to extend the appropriate warning. Keep it back, throttle it back, and that was there. Sheila, do you have a favorite watch system? And let me just preface this by saying, I read this intricate article recently, I think it was in Seahorse magazine, about all the kind of permutations you can have with watch routines. But on a Transatlantic, is there a watch system you think works most effectively?
Some of that depends on whether it's cold or hot out. Certainly the simplest, and we do it on the Bermuda race, is a 4-on, 4-off. But, and so you equally divide the crew that way. But for a long passage, it's really boring to have the same watch every day. So that's where something like a Swedish watch system, where you have two longer watches during the day, often 6 hours, 6 and 6, and then 3 4-hour watches at night. And that will dog itself naturally. So, so you get the dawn one day and you get full stars the next day, and it mixes things up. It's a lot easier to use that nowadays because we're not taking star sights, so it's okay if you're not up at the same time every day. If it's really cold or really hot, you might break some of those longer watches up a bit. Often on deliveries and things, if I have an odd number of crew, I use a staggered watch system so that if we have 2 people on watch, say they're each on watch for 4 hours, but in the middle of person A's watch, the person they started with goes down and a new person comes up. And then halfway through that watch, A goes down and a new person comes up. That way you always have one person who knows what's been going on for several hours, and one person who's fresh and ready to pay attention. You also learn a lot more jokes that way, because you have two different people to talk to all the time.
Gary, can I comment on it?
Yeah, go ahead, Ernie.
I just like that, we used the staggered watch system too, which worked very well. But we had a problem that was a lot bigger than you'd think, and probably people are going to go, boy, this is really dumb. The question was, what time is it?
Yeah.
And this is where, once again, as the skipper, I came up with the right answer, but I was overruled. Because at the beginning of the trip, I said, well, I think what we ought to do is set our clocks and watches on GMT, and then we won't have to change them. And the crew said, oh, no. That means it's going to be sunny at midnight when we start out, and that'd be very... So we'll we'll put the clocks ahead at the 7.5 degrees longitude line, right? Well, what actually happens, right? When it comes time to change the clocks, two of the people are asleep, right? So they don't do it. But then they get called an hour early because they don't know what time it is. And it would cause a hell of a problem. One of our crew back here actually was one of the real guys that wouldn't change his watch, and he was always screwed up.
Well, when you were transatlantic crossing, Ernie, did you see some real rough weather along the way? Any notable weather events?
Yes, we did. We got knocked down and hove to for about 24 hours. Went down the face of a wave and broached, and the boat went, I think the mast went in the water. I was in the cockpit at the time with my back to the seas, and I think the wave broke over us, and all I saw was green for a while. It caused minimal damage and no injuries, and everybody was clipped on. My brother's PFD, he was steering at the time, his PFD popped up. I had made one serious oversight, though, which I'd forgotten to remove the door aids and put the door aid covers on. And the door aids work great when it's raining or you get a lot of spray, but they don't work very well when they're underwater. And so we didn't get a lot of water below, but it was one of the crew said it was like a fire hose. But I just like to say that, you know, contrary to Sheila said every time she gets halfway across, never again. Our trip, despite that, was really enjoyable. And I could almost say that we were sorry to get there. We were having such a great time. And that was after 3 weeks, by the way.
You could have turned around and just come right back.
Well, I'm glad we didn't. We spent 10 wonderful years there.
Bill, have you had a rough experience on board?
I've had, well, my roughest experience on board was in the Pacific, not in the Atlantic. Does that count?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I learned about katabatic winds. We sailed down the west coast of the South Island from Nelson into Milford Sound, and knew we were timing ourselves against a front that was coming through, and by golly, I beat the front, and I was very proud of myself. You know, we got in, and then you're in Milford Sound. It's about 5 miles long, so you know you're going down in there and feeling good about yourself and being happy, and all of a sudden the wind started picking up, frighteningly so, I didn't realize it, but as the front comes across the sound, you get these katabatic winds that come down these 5,000-foot cliffs. I mean, it's your spatial sense is totally screwed up when you're in a 5,000-foot canyon. And we got knocked down once, and our deraids were underwater, and lost a little electronics gear. But I could not understand why there was one other boat out there, was a tour boat, and it was right up against the wall. And I'm saying, how crazy is that? You know, why are they so close to the wall? Well, because they were in the shadow. And, you know, you learn.
Andy, how about you? You've been some big blows, tough ones?
A couple. Only two really, really bad ones. We left here November the 13th, a Friday, with an IOR 50-footer.
You couldn't leave on Thursday?
I wasn't the skipper. We left here, and we had a wonderful ride down the bay. and all the way past Norfolk, wing and wing. Beautiful, beautiful sail. Cold, but that's okay. By the time we got to Hatteras, it was blowing, I don't know, we saw 80 before the wind instruments blew off the top of the mast, and we were going downwind at 12 knots. Just a little aside, the skipper's girlfriend was cooking. She had never cooked on a boat before, so she didn't know any better. For dinner that night, we had tacos with all the trimmings laid out on top of the engine box. I don't know how she kept them there. But my most vivid memory of that is we had a storm jib up, nothing else, and going downwind in the middle of the night, of course. And my watchmate, Billy Trenkle, who was a sailor with Dennis for many years, is nudging me because in order not to auger in into the wave in front of us, as we're doing 18 knots, I had to bear off a lot. I figured if I headed up, I'd broach, so I was bearing off, and we're both watching the leech of the jib going like this. So we're just on the edge, and if it had gone, it probably would have broken something. And so you're getting the odd poke in the ribs from Billy saying, "You know you're by the lee." Uh-huh.
So you headed up a little bit, I hope.
Once we got down to the bottom of the wave and didn't go into poke the bow into the next one.
Well, I was quite thrilled. I did a trip to Antarctica. I've done a couple times, and on sailboats, and communicating with satellite phone was really pretty special, even though at the time it was incredibly expensive. But now we have Starlink, and communications have got a lot easier at sea. So let's just go down the line. Sheila, are you using Starlink when you're out there, or do you recommend it? What's your communication?
I go offshore to get away from people.
Yeah. I'm hip.
No, we don't have Starlink on Selkie, but we do have some satellite communication required by the Bermuda race. Less is more for me on offshore. I mean, as far as getting weather and that sort of thing, but I'm not a social media sort of person. I did want to comment though on about it's not just the wind offshore that gets you, it's the seas. And on one transatlantic I did on a 35-footer, the low had gone through, and so the wind was coming back down. We'd been adding some sail, but the seas were still enormous and long. And I had this tubby little 35-footer, and we were having this great time sort of surfing down the waves. We had that boat going at 11.5 knots with a with a bow wave that went up to the spreaders. We were dropping, actually. We weren't surfing. I felt the stern lift up. I was on the helm. We had one other guy in the cockpit, and the two other people were below. And I looked over my shoulder to see what the next wave looked like. The next wave was 20 feet and vertical. And we were already halfway up the wave. And there was then a little bit of white right at the top. And then it fell like a house. Like that Buster Keaton thing where the house falls and he's standing in the open window. Only there was no open window there. So underwater, holding your breath, waiting for something, waiting for the water to shed. And as it sheds, and I've headed the boat straight down the wave, figuring if I tried to turn, we'd broach. And when the water shed, the mast was still there. That was good. Sails were still there. That was amazing. Harvey was there, happy. And then I saw that all of the starboard lifelines were loose. And that didn't make any sense. What had happened was that the pressure of that wave against the horseshoe that was on the stern pulpit had sheared the welds at the base of the stern pulpit stanchions. That's what hydraulic pressure you can get on a wave. We were incredibly lucky. We had the companionway boards in. We had the hatch slid to about an inch, and even at that, we got, I don't know, 50 or 70 gallons of water below just through that tiny little thing. And there's nothing you can do to avoid those waves. It's just one of the risks that we take. I found out later that I'd broken my nose, oh, by the way, but we had other things to do. Just by having my face pushed against the wheel.
Wow.
I just add one quick thing. When we were knocked down, we had canvas on the lifelines on both sides of the boat, which I'm not sure was a good idea. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but we when we fell on this wave, the wave that hit us bent the lifelines in on the windward side, and as the boat fell, it bent the lifelines in on the leeward side as well.
Yeah, well, when we were knocked down, we lost all our man overboard and gear off the port rail, the taffrail. So yeah, that water is powerful.
Have any of the four of you had a man overboard situation, a real man overboard?
Not me.
Does Oscar count?
Sheila, you have?
Yeah, so it was just toward the end of a Bermuda race, and we were just north of Bermuda. It was so clear. You could see all the lights on Bermuda, but there was no moon. So it was dark, dark, dark. You couldn't see anything a boat length away. And we just set the kite and up forward. This is a 38-footer. This is not a big boat. I hear man overboard. It's my brother Ian. And so, because Selkie is the boat she is, I just stuffed the boat up into the wind, plastered the spinnaker against the rig. The mainsail is luffing and so loud. The spinnaker is making all this noise. I'm trying to get him to lower the halyard. Nobody's listening to me. My other brother's in the cockpit. He says, I think I see Ian back over here on the quarter. So the immediate thing, as a good sister, I say in my very sisterly voice, Ian! And from the bow, I hear, what? Well, he had hooked in. He had clipped on. So they saw him go over the side and then saw the tether attached to the jack line. They weren't listening to me because they were pulling him back on board. It was a really good thing I stopped the boat. Otherwise, I probably would have drowned him alongside the boat. But it's good to hook in.
So I'm going to go down the line here, start with Andy. Somebody here is considering doing a transatlantic race. They've never done it. Tell them why they should do a transatlantic.
What Sheila said, it's great to get away from the wear and tear of daily life on land. It distills life into a small set of priorities. You know, you do this and you can have a great time. You do that and you're going to die. You know, but it's just a beautiful way of doing it, and I love it because sometimes when when things are going great on board, I'll sometimes get 6 hours in a row to read, and we do generally have a crew of 3, and I'll do 3 on, 6 off with one person on deck, and that watch system dogs as well. So every 3 days you get or every day you get a different watch.
You do transatlantic with 3 people on the boat?
Sure.
That's a lot of getting along with each other, but you don't see each other if you're up there by yourself all the time.
Well, you do, because you get 6 hours sleep in the dark, and that allows you, that's practically a night's sleep. And so everybody stays very well rested. And you put the finishing touches on your sleep and after your morning watch, and off you go. Then everybody does. They're in the cockpit hanging out.
Bill, do you find conversations more in-depth, more interesting, more philosophical when you're out at sea?
Well, they're definitely philosophical. I think that the thing about the kind of ocean cruising passage is that it fulfills a different, it brings you a different set of skills than, say, racing does. You know, racing really teaches you the weaknesses in your boat, what you're lacking. It teaches you how to move your boat. Ocean passages teach you a lot about yourself, and it teaches you a whole different skill set. And it's just incredibly satisfying because it is the same way you prepare for a race. You prepare for a serious crossing. So it may be a year of preparation and thinking about it and planning, and it becomes a campaign. And once you do that, you get to enjoy it several times. You get to enjoy the planning process. I mean, because you're really into it. You're reading and you're thinking and you're talking to people. And then you get to do it, and you do it in that way that you get this great. When we arrived in Kinsale, people didn't want to part with one another. I mean, we had a great crew, and picking that crew becomes an art. I mean, you really I'm getting better at it finally, but you know, when you get across and your crew people have become good friends, it's a really satisfying experience when the least experienced person on this crossing told me, I ran out into the cockpit, Skip, you're not clipped in. You know, I said thank you, and I thought, yes, you know, we're doing a good job on this boat.
Ernie, what would you say to somebody considering doing a transatlantic, why they should do it?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I've been sitting here thinking there are 24 transatlantics on this panel, of which I've done one. And if you've decided to take your boat transatlantic, then these are the three people you want to talk to. If you're thinking about it, or maybe someday or something like that, well, maybe I'm your guy, actually, because the way I got into it, I just like to tell a brief story, is I really had no thoughts or plans about transatlantic, and I was sitting around one day with my friend Doug back here, and he says, you know what we've never done? My antenna went up. I said, no, what's that? He said, we haven't sailed transatlantic. And I went, yeah? And he said, we ought to do that. And I said, I suppose so. Guess whose boat we went on? So that was the sort of backwards way that we got into this. Fortunately, the idea came up, I get on at least a year in advance, because by the time we finally departed, the boat was actually in pretty good shape. I'd done a pretty thorough, I wouldn't say refit, but you know, we changed the standing rigging and you know, had full spares, and the boat was very well prepared, I think, by the time we finally left. And it was a great trip, and I'd encourage anybody that's even thinking about it to think about it solidly for all the reasons that have been mentioned.
Is there anything special you do regarding people you're going to encounter when you get there with the authorities or immigration, or you know, you're arriving someplace? I mean, if you come to, I'm going to do this in front of Jay Gal, this is going to be fun. When you get here to America's sailing capital, my friends in Newport love when I say that.
Except sometimes the wind blows the water out of the bay.
Yeah. The bay's filling up, by the way. There was a report in the paper in 1950 when I was aboard. Once or twice a year, city dock would flood. This past year, so far, we're not done with the year, they've had 97 days of flooding there. So I don't know if global warming is happening. It's certainly happening there.
But I think you were asking about dealing with authorities when we get there, yeah. I think basically it's the same everywhere. We did have a fairly unusual situation that I wrote an article about in Voyages. We had taken a saluting cannon along, which in retrospect maybe wasn't such a great idea. I promptly declared it when we arrived in Kinsale, and they couldn't have cared less. But then when we got to Oban, the authorities came on board, and to make a very long story short, they relieved me of my saluting cannon. I did eventually get it back a year and a half later, and about $1,000 in fees and all that stuff. We were also boarded, I would say probably once a year, maybe more in the 10 years that we were there for one reason or another. But they were always polite. Sometimes they were extremely thorough, but we didn't really have any misadventures there.
Sheila, a final word here on why somebody should do a Transatlantic?
Sure. There is no, well, I have not found any place on Earth, on land, where you can feel as free and self-reliant as you feel at sea. And I remember on one of the first transatlantics having this really strange mental discussion with myself really late at night. And that here I was on, it was about a 47-footer. I was alone on deck. I was in control of my world. My entire world was 47 feet long, and I had complete control over it, which was a pretty hefty thing to think about. And then I looked up at the stars and realized that I was the tiniest mote in the universe. And it didn't matter if I existed or not. And then I kept going back and forth between being the biggest thing around and the littlest thing around. But I guess it was sort of a self-leveling experience that I realized that I'm either not as great as I think I am and not as tiny as I think I am.
Gary, can I just add one other thing too, which kind of the punchline was that the Transatlantic for me was a really life-changing experience. You know, we ended up spending 10 years of my life in cruising in Europe, and I ended up you know, joining the North American station and making a lot of friends in the Baltic that I still see regularly 15 years later here. So it was a wonderful thing.
Which brings me to my short story. So it was about 3 Bermuda races ago. It's blowing pretty hard out of the northeast, 32 knots or so. We're aimed right at Bermuda. And about 3:45, somebody wakes me up. It's time to go and watch. And the amount of work to go to the bathroom, where'd my boots go? Oh my God, they're wet now. Get the foul weather gear on, slurp down a cup of tea. And just as I open the hatch to come up on deck, this wave comes over, deluging me, and that feeling of water going down the front of your, you know, and then I'm clambering my way back toward the cockpit, and you know, I'm 70 at this point. I thought to myself, what in the world am I doing here? But then somebody said the most magic words that can be spoken in the sport of sailing. Gary, would you like to take the helm? Yeah. I would. Yeah. And now I'm steering, skipping over waves at 14 knots with a beautiful sky overhead, bouncing off these waves, forgetting about being maybe seasick or not feeling a little uncomfortable. And that was the magic of connecting with the sky and the water and the boat and your body all at one. It was a magic moment, and that's why I keep coming back to do it.
Can I keep 2 minutes?
Go ahead, Andy. You have a comment?
Yeah. So a little story. We took a Oyster 55 down to St. Martin, and a brand new owner hadn't sailed the boat. He's sailing with us, and I had one of my 3 or 4 crew with me, my regulars, and we had nothing but problems with the boat. We had fuel problems going down to Bermuda. We had to basically pump diesel out of the top of the tank into a 5-gallon jerry jug and cut the feed and return lines, stuck them into the 5-gallon jerry jug, and when that was gone, we pumped more fuel out of it by hand with one of those little brass pumps that we use for oil changes. Lots of troubles, And we got the tank cleaned in Bermuda, took off, everything's going fine. Had a great day of sailing, wind quit, turned the engine on, big noise. The skeg had broken off the bottom of the boat and was going around on the shaft. So no engine. We had a generator so we could charge the batteries, and we could use the engine to charge the batteries for that matter. But midway to St. Martin from Bermuda was Thanksgiving Day. And, you know, with my philosophy with food, we had a big turkey breast roasted in the oven. We had a couple of pies, potatoes and vegetables, and the full-on thing. We all sat around, we all sat around the table, and we're having our Thanksgiving dinner, and it was a little quiet, so I asked a question. What's everybody's favorite Thanksgiving? We went around the table, and you know, we were all feeling bad for the owner, and he's sitting down there, and question comes to him. He said, you know, I've been really lucky in my life. I've been very successful financially. I've got a great family that I love, and they love me. But you know, this could well be my favorite Thanksgiving. And all of a sudden the conversation started out, and we had a great old sail the rest of the way.
Very nice. Well, it was a nice afternoon. Sheila, thank you very much. Ernie, well done. You beat your record there, 18 minutes down to 6. Thank you very much, Bill. And Andy, you need one more to tie Sheila here, so I assume you're going to do that. You don't want to be 9 out of 10. You want to be 10 out of 10.
Maybe I'll take her with me.
Yeah, there you go. Then she'll have 11. Can we give a hand to our panel? Thank you, everybody. Anybody have any questions they would like to ask?
Gary, I have one. Medical emergencies. There's no 911. You're out in the middle of nowhere. How do you handle them?
Medical emergencies. How do you handle that?
Bring a doctor.
Bring a doctor. Bill White had some a slide. Bill, maybe you'd like to make a comment.
I'm a retired ER doc. The way I deal with this myself, obviously, is good preparation. But I know a little bit more than the average person who goes offshore. It's really good to have a resource that you can use while you're offshore. And one of the things you can do, this is a good company. I don't have any secondary influence from them. They don't pay me or anything, but GW Maritime Medical Associates offers a subscription service that gives you unlimited consults from your boat, and they can utilize virtually any kind of communication you have, whether it's video conferencing, text messages, cell phones, anything that you want to use. And they are linked directly to the emergency department at George Washington University Hospital. The people there have an interest in sailing and in offshore medicine. They manage medical emergencies for shipping companies, freighters, all the way down to cruising sailors. They can arrange for, if need be, medevacs. They can, even if it may cost extra, but they can manage, if you need somebody to accompany you for a repatriation, they can send a team over to do that. That's beyond the somewhere between $80 and $200 that you might spend for a subscription for a 1-month passage to Europe from the US. They have a minimum 1-month subscription. I called them before we had this meeting to verify what their costs were, told them about what this cruise was going to be, and their comment was, yes, depending on the size of the boat and the event that you're involved in, it's about $80 to $100 per boat for a 1-month passage. It's just really good. I mean, you can call as many times as you want, and you've got expert opinion at your fingertips. So I hope that answers your question. Very good. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to finish with one little wrap up, and we'll call it a day. So not too long ago, I was at this campfire, and there were about 20 guys around the campfire, and this little story broke out going around the horn. What's the most interesting vehicle you've ever driven? And somebody had been in an F1 car, somebody done a NASCAR, and they came to me, and I said, I can't talk about cars, but I was on one of these foiling boats, courtesy of American Magic. We're going upwind at 44 knots. I thought that was pretty cool and feeling proud of myself. And And then when we came to this one, he was an older guy, and he had been quiet the whole time, and I won't tell you his name, but, sir, you've been kind of quiet. What's the most interesting vehicle you've driven? And the guy puts his head down and says, probably the lunar module. Okay, you mean on the moon, Buzz Aldrin, and, you know, so it was pretty, he won the contest. Hey, it was a great session. Thank you very much. Jay?
So I want to recognize, I forgot to mention Steve Burlack, who, when I came up with this idea, I said, Steve, what about doing a panel discussion at the fall meeting in Annapolis to talk about preparing for the Transatlantic? And Steve is all about doing this Transatlantic Cruising Company. Steve is actually in Europe right now doing his day job as a Olympic development ski coach. And so Steve couldn't be with us today, but I want to recognize that Steve put a lot of effort into putting the panel together, putting the questions together. And I really want to thank all the panelists and my friend Gary Jobson for moderating this. I think it's been very enlightening, and I hope that anybody who's on the fence about doing the Transatlantic is encouraged to do it. So thank you all for coming.